Hi, my name is Caitlin Green. This presentation is for EDLC 632, Literacy and Language Instruction, taking place during the 2024 Spring B term. Today, we will be discussing the language art of listening. Before exploring listening as a language art, it is important to know the definition of listening. According to Tompkin, listening is an invisible process by which spoken messages are received and converted to meaning in the mind. This presentation has three core learning outcomes. The first is to be able to identify the four types of listening. Second is to be able to explain how students can use each type of listening. Finally, the third is to understand how teachers can incorporate listening into their lessons. There are four types of listening that we are going to cover. These four types of listening are discriminative listening, aesthetic listening, efferent listening, and critical listening. Let's look closer at the first type of listening, discriminative listening. Discriminative listening is the most common type of listening that takes place. According to Behera, discriminative listening ensures that the listener gets the differences between sounds. In discriminative listening, listeners will use things like a speaker's body language and tone to help interpret their meaning. Aesthetic listening takes place when people are listening for enjoyment. Examples of listening for enjoyment can include listening to songs, audiobooks, or podcasts. When one is listening to something for aesthetic purposes, they will be participating in the three aesthetic listening strategies. These three strategies are predicting, or trying to guess what will happen next, visualizing, meaning the listener is taking what is being described to them and picturing what it looks like, and finally, connecting, which is when the listener is able to make connections to what they are hearing to other things that have happened either in their life or other stories and art that they have consumed. Now let's look at efferent listening. Tompkin describes efferent listening as the listening that takes place when a person is attempting to understand a message and remember important information. Efferent listening is the most common type of listening that takes place in the classroom. There are four strategies of efferent listening. The first is organizing, which is when the listener uses things such as a graphic organizer to keep track of information being presented to them. Second is summarizing, when the listener can take key components of what they heard, adding in small details to create a summary. Third is getting clues from the speaker, which is when the listener notices things such as the speaker's tone or body language to help interpret what they are listening to. And finally is monitoring. Monitoring happens when the listener does a self check in to make sure they are understanding what they are listening to. They do this by asking themselves questions such as, why am I listening to this? Or should I be taking notes? Behera describes critical listening as evaluating what one is listening to, making judgments, and interpreting the information. Critical listening is an extension of efferent listening. When someone is participating in critical listening, they are usually listening to something like a debate, political speech, or commercial. Listeners participating in critical listening are trying to discover the truth in what is being presented to them and will judge what they are hearing against their own personal values. How can teachers implement listening in the classroom? One way a teacher can utilize listening in the classroom is by reading aloud. According to an article on Reading Rockets, children can listen on a higher language level than they can read. So, reading aloud makes complex ideas more accessible and exposes children to vocabulary and language patterns that are not part of everyday speech. Another way teachers can promote listening in the classroom is by having students participate in note taking. When a student actively takes notes, they are having to closely pay attention and concentrate on what is being said by the speaker. Finally, a third classroom activity to help promote listening could be the teacher having students participate in a draw along activity. In this activity, the teacher will tell the students a story and have them draw a picture of what is taking place. After the story is over, they will then discuss said pictures to see if they match up with what the students heard. This presentation has covered listening as a language art. It has gone over the 4 types of listening, how students can use each type of listening, and how teachers can incorporate listening into their classroom lessons.